The hum of the starship Vanguard filled the silence of space as it cruised through the void. The vastness of the galaxy stretched out before it, and yet, there was something unsettling about this mission. The crew, though experienced, couldn't shake the growing feeling of unease that seemed to hang in the air. It had all started with a strange, urgent message from Earth's Space Exploration Division. A previously uncharted section of space had emitted a series of unexplained energy readings. The intensity of these signals was unlike anything the scientists had ever encountered. They weren't sure if it was a natural phenomenon or something else entirely. But one thing was clear, the anomaly needed to be investigated. And so, the Vanguard, the fastest and most advanced human starship, was dispatched to investigate this strange disturbance. Captain Riley, a veteran of countless space missions, sat in the command chair, staring at the glowing display screens in front of him. His face was calm, but his mind was racing. This mission felt different. The energy readings they had received were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The anomaly didn't just defy understanding, it seemed to be deliberately hiding something. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lay ahead would change everything. As the Vanguard neared the source of the disturbance, the crew began to notice strange anomalies within their own ship's systems. The lights on the bridge flickered, and a low hum emanated from the ship's engines, fluctuating unnervingly. Communications began to crackle, making it difficult for the crew to reach Earth or even communicate with each other. Riley's hand hovered over the console, unsure if it was a technical malfunction or something far worse. Suddenly, the tension in the air grew heavier. A soft, barely perceptible change occurred, one that only seasoned space explorers like Riley would notice. The ship's gravity seemed to weaken, just for a moment. The faintest tremor ran through the floor beneath them. Everyone on the bridge froze, staring at their screens in confusion. Then, the AI system, normally the most reliable part of the Vanguard, began to malfunction. It sputtered and faltered, flashing warnings in every direction. Something was interfering with their equipment, something they couldn't see. Captain Riley leaned forward, his hand gripping the armrest as a sense of dread filled the room. Whatever it was growing stronger. "We need to be careful," Lieutenant Kai said, breaking the silence. He had been watching the monitors closely, his eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary. "Whatever's out there, it's not friendly." "Prepare for anything," Riley responded, his voice tight with resolve. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet, but we're about to find out." The crew continued to monitor the situation closely, but then the unthinkable happened. One of the crew members, Ensign Morrow, was standing by the console when a strange noise filled the room, like the whir of air being displaced. He looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. In an instant, he vanished. No cry for help, no movement. Just gone. Panic gripped the crew. They scrambled to activate the ship's security systems, but everything was failing. The ship's lights flickered once more, and then, silence. Morrow had simply vanished into thin air, and no one knew why or how. The AI, now more erratic than ever, began to spit out garbled warnings, but there was nothing on the scanners. Nothing visible at all. It was as if Morrow had been erased from existence. Captain Riley stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the implications. The first instinct was to assume an internal malfunction or an attack from an external source. But no, the readings showed no signs of hostile forces. This wasn't an enemy ship, this wasn't a simple mechanical failure. They were dealing with something far more elusive. What the hell just happened? Lieutenant Kai asked, his voice trembling. It wasn't a malfunction, Riley said, his voice cold as he stared at the empty space where Morrow had been. Something or someone is out there. And they've just made their first move. The crew quickly realized they weren't alone. The invisible force that had taken Morrow was now present all around them, lurking in the shadows, moving in ways they could not comprehend. Their sensors were useless, everything that should have been visible was now shrouded in mystery. In the cold, dark void of space, something had found a way to render itself unseen. But despite the overwhelming sense of danger, the humans refused to cower. They would not allow this unknown threat to simply take them down. They had to figure out what was happening, and fast. As they continued their search for answers, more disturbing things began to happen. Distorted lights flickered throughout the ship, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. The whispers grew louder, as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate with them from the dark corners of the ship. No one could pinpoint the source of the sounds. Were they hallucinations? Or was it something far more sinister, something that existed outside of their perception? Riley stood at the center of the command deck, his eyes scanning the rapidly deteriorating situation. "We have to find out what we're dealing with before it's too late," he said firmly. "Whatever's out there isn't just messing with our ship. It's messing with our minds." The crew began to fan out, searching every corner of the ship for any sign of the invisible threat. They used every piece of technology at their disposal, but it was as though the force around them was able to block everything. Every sensor, every weapon, every tool that should have been reliable, nothing worked. They were fighting an invisible enemy, one that was always one step ahead. It was then that the Vanguard's weapon systems failed. All at once, the ship's defenses shut down completely, leaving them completely vulnerable. Captain Riley felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Get ready for anything," he ordered. "We may not have our weapons, but we still have our wits." A low hum filled the room as the invisible aliens, now fully aware of the humans' presence, prepared to strike. The first attack came swiftly, a blast of energy from nowhere, striking the hull with a violent force. It was like being hit by an invisible fist. The crew stumbled, trying to maintain their balance as the ship rocked under the pressure. Alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to react. But it was no use. The invisible aliens had complete control over their ship's systems. They had rendered the humans' technology useless, forcing them into a desperate situation. As the crew fought to stay alive, they realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a random anomaly. This was a deliberate attack from an enemy they could not see, and possibly, could not defeat. But Captain Riley refused to give up. He knew humanity's greatest strength was its ability to think and adapt. He just hoped it would be enough. As the battle raged on, the lights flickered again, and in the darkness, the true enemy revealed itself, a silent, unseen force, ready to destroy them all. And so, the Vanguard's crew was thrust into a deadly game of survival, with an invisible predator hunting them from the shadows. The fight for their lives had just begun, and no one knew who, or what, would be left standing in the end. The Vanguard's crew had barely managed to stabilize the ship after the initial attack. They were shaken, but they weren't ready to give up. Captain Riley stood at the command station, his mind racing as he tried to understand what was happening. The crew's systems were down, and yet something more insidious than just a malfunction had occurred. The attack had come from nowhere, an enemy they couldn't see, an enemy they didn't understand. The humans had thought they were dealing with a random anomaly, but now they realized they were up against something far worse. These were no ordinary creatures. The subtle energy patterns, the invisible force affecting their equipment, everything pointed to one thing: an advanced alien species. But this species was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. They were not only capable of cloaking themselves, but they were also invisible to all known technology. No weapons, no scans, no sensors could detect them. These aliens were literally hiding in plain sight, and worse still, they were hunting the human crew, picking them off one by one. Captain Riley, though deeply disturbed by the realization, wasn't about to let his crew go down without a fight. The odds were overwhelming, but if there was one thing humanity had proven time and again, it was that they would never go down without a struggle. "We might not be able to see them," Riley muttered to Lieutenant Kai as they prepared for their next move, "but we sure as hell can outsmart them." Kai nodded, his brow furrowed in determination. "We may be at a disadvantage, but we've got something they don't: human ingenuity. The crew rallied around their captain, refusing to let the invisible enemies have the upper hand. Despite the fact that the aliens had technology beyond anything the humans could comprehend, the crew knew they couldn't just sit back and wait for the inevitable. Riley and Kai quickly set about organizing a counteroffensive. They had limited resources now, but they could still fight, using their knowledge of stealth, trickery, and sheer human creativity. "Let's make them think we're gone," Riley said, a plan beginning to take shape in his mind. "We're going to use the ship's low-power modes to simulate a system shutdown. They'll think we're vulnerable." The crew worked quickly to implement the plan, turning off lights, dimming the ship's energy levels, and making it look as though the Vanguard was nothing more than a silent hulk drifting in space. The hope was to draw the invisible aliens into a trap, to make them think they had won. The tension on the ship was palpable as the crew waited, every nerve on edge, for the aliens to make their move. But the plan came at a cost. As the trap was set, the crew was spread thin. They knew they had one shot at this, and they had to make it count. It was a game of patience now, with the crew hoping the invisible enemies would underestimate them. Just as the tension reached its peak, a loud, sudden crash echoed through the ship. The crew jumped, their hearts racing. Bonner, a senior engineer and one of the most trusted members of the crew, was manning the rear defenses when the attack came. He barely had time to react before the invisible aliens descended upon him, using their advanced technology to strike with lethal precision. Bonner fought valiantly, but it was clear the odds were too much for him. In his final moments, Bonner made a decision that would forever change the course of the battle. Knowing that the crew was counting on him, he activated the ship's last-ditch self-destruct sequence, setting the countdown to 3 minutes. His sacrifice was meant to ensure that the Vanguard wouldn't fall into enemy hands, that the ship's secrets wouldn't be used against humanity. Bonner's death hit the crew hard. It was a devastating loss. He wasn't just a colleague, he was a friend, a comrade who had been by their side through thick and thin. His death left a hole in the heart of the crew, but in that moment, something changed. Their grief ignited a fire within them. They could no longer just fight to survive, they were now fighting for Bonner, for each other, and for humanity's future. The thought of his final sacrifice filled them with a new determination. They would not let his death be in vain. As the timer ticked down, the crew quickly regrouped, pushing through the pain and fear. They knew what they had to do. The Vanguard may have been vulnerable, but they would not let these invisible enemies claim their home. It was time to turn the tables. Riley's voice rang out over the comms, steady despite the chaos. "Prepare yourselves. We fight for Bonner, for Earth, and for every soul who believes in us. We're taking this fight to them." In that moment, the humans weren't just soldiers or explorers, they were a united force, determined to defeat an invisible enemy that had no idea what it was about to face. Their struggle was far from over, but they knew one thing for certain: they would not go quietly into the dark. The crew of the Vanguard had barely caught their breath before the next wave of attacks came. The invisible aliens were relentless, their movements silent and swift. The ship was dark and quiet, save for the tense, rapid footsteps of the crew as they scrambled to adapt to this new form of warfare. Captain Riley paced back and forth, his mind racing. The aliens' invisibility was no longer just a terrifying mystery, it was a direct threat to their survival. The humans had no choice but to fight back, and they needed to find a way to level the playing field. Riley had no illusions about their chances, they were underdogs, outmatched by an enemy with superior technology. But if history had taught them anything, it was that humanity could fight back with ingenuity, with every ounce of their will. The crew started to come together, pooling their knowledge and resources. They realized that if they couldn't see the enemy, they needed to find another way to detect them. "We need to find their energy signatures," Riley said, determination in his voice. "If we can't see them, then we'll track them through their power sources." With the help of the Vanguard's AI, the team began to develop a plan. The ship's sensors were designed to detect a wide range of energy readings, but the cloaked aliens had bypassed most of them. Still, the AI's advanced algorithms were able to pinpoint subtle anomalies in the energy around the ship. With this new data, the humans began to form a strategy to catch the invisible threat. At the same time, the crew realized that they couldn't rely on conventional weapons. The aliens' advanced technology meant that traditional methods would only get them so far. They needed to think differently. They scavenged through the ship's storage rooms, pulling together whatever tech they could find. After much experimentation, they were able to cobble together EMP, electromagnetic pulse, devices, an unconventional but promising weapon to disrupt the aliens' cloaking abilities. With their plan in place, the crew set up a daring trap. Captain Riley and Lieutenant Kai led the charge, knowing that they would be the ones to face the invisible aliens in close-quarters combat. Their target was one of the aliens. This would be their chance to gather more information about their enemy's capabilities and weaknesses. The ship's corridors were dark, the only light coming from dim emergency bulbs. The silence was deafening as the crew moved into position, their cloaking devices activated. Riley's heart pounded in his chest as he readied his weapon. This was it. The trap had been set. The tension in the air was thick, and they all knew the risks involved. As the first alien approached, Riley's senses were on high alert. The corridor around him felt alive with danger, every sound amplified in the darkened space. He could feel the alien's presence, a shift in the air, a subtle distortion in the light. The AI had pinpointed its location, but still, it was hard to see. It was as if the alien was a part of the shadows themselves. The moment came in an instant. The alien materialized from the shadows, its form flickering briefly before it became fully visible, just long enough for Riley to react. He swung his EMP weapon in the alien's direction, unleashing a burst of energy that struck with deadly accuracy. The alien screeched, momentarily visible, before it vanished back into thin air. The humans had caught their first glimpse of the creature, and it was just as terrifying as they had imagined, large, sleek, with alien technology built into its body. Riley and Kai advanced, closing the gap as they moved swiftly through the narrow corridors. The alien, though wounded, didn't stop. It was agile, quick, and dangerous. The battle became a deadly dance, with the crew using every advantage they had to stay one step ahead. The EMP devices were their primary weapon, but they also had to rely on their physical skills and combat training. Every corner they turned, every shadow they crossed, felt like a life-or-death moment. The alien's presence was felt long before it could be seen, its movements causing the air to shift, its footfalls barely making a sound. The crew had to fight with precision, knowing that a single mistake could mean the end. In the midst of the fight, the ship's corridors seemed to come alive. The flickering shadows made it hard to tell where the alien ended and the darkness began. The tension was overwhelming. Riley's pulse raced as he and Kai pressed on, inching closer to the alien's elusive form. Then, it happened. The alien made a move so swift that it almost seemed to disappear altogether. Riley barely had time to react, but his instincts kicked in. He fired the EMP device, hitting the alien in the shoulder. The force of the pulse sent a shockwave through the air, and for a split second, the alien flickered, its form becoming visible once again. The crew took their shot. Kai lunged forward, his blade flashing in the low light, and made contact with the alien's armor. The alien hissed in pain, but it wasn't enough to defeat it. The fight was far from over. The crew knew they couldn't let up. In that moment, Riley felt a mix of fear and adrenaline surge through him. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore, it was a battle for their very existence. With each passing second, the enemy grew more dangerous, more unpredictable. But Riley and his team were determined to not just fight, but to win. They had to. The corridors of the Vanguard had become a battleground. The humans had found a way to fight back, but it was clear they were only scratching the surface. The invisible enemies were powerful, but they were not invincible. Riley's eyes locked with Kai's as they prepared for the next phase of the fight. They had a plan, and they were going to see it through. As the battle raged on, the darkened halls of the ship echoed with the sounds of war. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering with the movement of enemies, but the humans weren't afraid anymore. They had a taste of victory, and they would not stop until they had taken down the invisible threat. The fight was only just beginning, the battle had dragged on longer than anyone anticipated, and the crew of the Vanguard was growing weary. The invisible alien enemy, relentless and deadly, had taken its toll. But in the heart of the chaos, Dr. Selene, the ship's brilliant scientist, had made a breakthrough. The aliens' cloaking technology, which had once seemed like an insurmountable advantage, now appeared to have a hidden weakness. After weeks of analyzing the data, Selene discovered that the cloaking devices were powered by an energy field that, if disrupted, would render the aliens visible. It was the first real breakthrough the crew had since the battle began. The hope it sparked was like a new breath of life. Selene quickly shared her findings with Captain Riley and the rest of the crew. With this knowledge, they knew what they had to do next. The humans had already developed EMP devices to fight back against the aliens, but these were not enough to stop them for good. Now, with Selene's discovery, they had a chance to develop a more targeted weapon, a pulse that could directly interfere with the invisibility fields. It was risky, but it was their best shot at turning the tide of the battle. The crew knew this weapon could make the difference between survival and annihilation. They had to act fast, before the aliens could adapt and counter it. The humans quickly worked to build the new weapon, a modified version of their EMP device that would focus the energy pulse in a specific direction. It was a delicate operation, requiring all of Selene's expertise and the team's precise coordination. But after days of sleepless work, they were ready. The weapon was no longer a theory, it was a reality. With the new weapon in hand, the crew set their sights on their ultimate target, the alien leader's hidden base. They had learned the location from a captured alien scout, and now they knew the final battle would take place there. If they could destroy the alien command center, they could break the back of the enemy forces and win the war. As the crew prepared for the assault, the stakes couldn't have been higher. This would be their most dangerous mission yet. The aliens were hiding in the dark corners of their base, and the crew would have to move carefully, making every step count. If they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. But if they succeeded, it would mean the end of the invisible threat that had tormented them for so long. Lieutenant Kai, ever the determined soldier, led the charge. His mind was focused, his body tense with the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. But as they prepared to launch the assault, a painful memory crept into his mind, Bonner's death. Bonner had been more than just a crew member, he had been a friend. The loss of Bonner had hit everyone hard, but it had been especially hard on Kai. He had watched Bonner sacrifice himself to protect the crew, and that moment had etched itself deep into Kai's heart. Now, as they prepared to confront the aliens head-on, Kai felt Bonner's presence in every move he made. The crew wasn't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for Bonner's memory, for the friends they had lost, for the hope that they could defeat the enemy once and for all. Bonner's death had fueled their determination, and now they would carry that motivation into the final battle. Kai's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the crew's boots on the metal floors of the Vanguard as they moved toward the alien base. There was no time for hesitation. They had a mission to complete. Kai clenched his fist around his weapon, the pulse gun that would be their key to victory. They were ready. The crew approached the base with precision. Using their cloaking devices, they moved through the darkened corridors of the alien stronghold, careful not to alert the enemy. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Each turn could bring them face to face with an invisible threat, but they pressed on. They had come this far, and they wouldn't stop now. As they neared the central chamber of the base, they encountered heavy resistance. The aliens, now aware of the human presence, launched a counterattack. But the humans were ready. They activated the new pulse weapon, unleashing a wave of energy that shattered the invisibility shields of the attacking aliens. For the first time since the battle began, the humans could see their enemies clearly. The aliens were fast and brutal, but the humans were prepared. They fought back with everything they had, using their new weapon to disable the aliens' cloaking devices and bring them into the light. In the thick of the fight, Lieutenant Kai's emotions boiled over. As the crew pushed forward, his thoughts returned to Bonner. He could almost feel Bonner beside him, urging him on. He could hear Bonner's voice in his head, telling him not to give up. Bonner's sacrifice was a constant reminder of what they were fighting for. It wasn't just the mission, it was for each other. It was for everyone they had lost along the way. The final battle raged on, but the humans were gaining the upper hand. The pulse weapon had given them a fighting chance, and they were using it to its fullest potential. Kai led the charge, his heart full of determination and the memory of his fallen comrades. The crew's spirits were high, despite the odds, and their unity was their greatest strength. They knew that if they fought together, they could win. And then, as the dust began to settle and the last of the aliens fell, they found themselves standing at the heart of the alien base. The final battle was over. The aliens were no longer invisible. The crew had triumphed against an enemy that had seemed impossible to defeat. But the victory came at a cost. The emotional weight of the battle was heavy on all of them, and the memory of Bonner's sacrifice would stay with them forever. As the crew regrouped, they looked to the future, knowing that this victory was only the beginning. They had proven that humanity could stand up against any threat, no matter how invisible it seemed. The time had come. With their new weapon ready, the crew of the Vanguard knew that they were about to face the final and most dangerous confrontation of their lives. The invisible aliens had terrorized them long enough, and it was now time for humanity to strike back and end the nightmare. The mission had been long, and many had already sacrificed everything. Bonner's death, and the many close calls that had followed, had built up a relentless desire for victory. But it wouldn't be easy. The aliens were relentless, powerful, and technologically superior. The odds were stacked against them, but the humans had one thing the aliens didn't: determination. Captain Riley stood at the command deck of the Vanguard, looking out into the abyss of space. The alien base, shrouded in darkness, hovered before them. It was an imposing sight, massive, heavily defended, and teeming with alien forces. But Riley didn't flinch. The Vanguard had been through hell and back, and now it was time to finish what they had started. He turned to his crew. They were tired, battle-worn, but they were ready. The humans initiated the assault with a powerful orbital bombardment. Massive cannons aboard the Vanguard unleashed a hail of fire, striking the alien base's outer defenses. Explosions lit up the dark space, painting the vastness of the cosmos with bursts of fiery light. The shockwaves from the bombardment rattled the ship, but the crew stood firm. This was it. They were hitting the aliens with everything they had. The first wave of the attack was a success. The outer defenses of the alien stronghold were severely damaged. But this wasn't over. The invisible aliens would fight back with everything they had, and the final battle was only just beginning. As the bombardment continued, the humans activated their cloaking devices and moved in closer. The enemy ships, still invisible, began to engage the Vanguard. The battle was chaotic, with flashes of weapons fire appearing from nowhere. The humans fought bravely, using their knowledge of stealth and their advanced technology to counter the aliens' attacks. The Vanguard moved quickly, dodging blasts and launching precise counterstrikes, but the enemy was relentless. The humans were outnumbered, and their weapon systems were pushed to their limits. Then came the heart-pounding chase through the alien stronghold. The humans had managed to infiltrate the base's interior using their cloaking devices, but the alien forces weren't far behind. Every corner they turned, every shadow they hid in, the aliens seemed to be one step ahead. The corridors were dark and narrow, the air thick with tension. But the humans didn't back down. Captain Riley led the way, his crew following closely behind as they sprinted through the alien halls, firing at any enemy they saw. The flickering lights and the distant sounds of footsteps made the atmosphere thick with suspense. The crew was getting closer to their ultimate target, the alien leader, whose defeat would signal the end of the invasion. The aliens' leader, a massive figure cloaked in shadow, appeared before them in a grand hall, surrounded by a dozen of his most elite warriors. The moment had come for the final showdown. The humans, armed with their pulse weapons and determination, prepared for the fight of their lives. The alien leader, sensing their approach, activated his own cloaking device, vanishing into thin air. But the humans were ready. The pulse weapons, developed by Dr. Celine, had given them an edge. They fired the pulse blasts, disrupting the alien leader's cloak and revealing his location. The humans now had their shot. The battle was fierce. The alien leader, a towering figure of strength and technological prowess, fought back with unmatched fury. His warriors were skilled, and their invisible attacks came from every direction. But the humans were determined. The fight was chaotic, with weapons fire filling the air, and the sound of clashing combat reverberating throughout the halls. Captain Riley led the charge, using his own strength and tactical skill to strike at the alien leader. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Kai and the rest of the crew fought off the elite warriors, pushing back with everything they had. Their survival was at stake. The final moments of the battle were a blur. Captain Riley and the alien leader faced off in a brutal confrontation. The fight was a battle of wills, human determination versus alien superiority. The alien leader, with all his power, couldn't match the strength of humanity's resolve. Riley's weapon collided with the alien leader's, sparks flying, but it was the humans' willpower that gave them the edge. With one final, powerful strike, Riley brought the alien leader to his knees. The fight was over. But even as the alien leader fell, the battle didn't end. The alien base began to crumble around them. The remaining warriors launched a final, desperate counterattack, but it was too late. The humans had succeeded. The alien invasion was over. The final victory was bittersweet. The humans had won, but at a great cost. Many had fallen in the struggle, and the emotional weight of their loss hung heavy in the air. But as the alien base collapsed and the Vanguard crew regrouped, there was a sense of triumph. They had faced an impossible enemy and emerged victorious. The invisible aliens, with all their advanced technology, had been defeated by the ingenuity, courage, and determination of humanity. As the crew looked to the stars, they knew that this battle would be remembered for generations to come. It was a testament to the strength of humanity. They had proven that even when outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an overwhelming force, the human spirit would never back down. It was a victory that would echo through the ages, a victory over evil, a victory for good. The final battle had been fought, and humanity had triumphed. The invisible threat had been vanquished, and the future of the galaxy was now in the hands of those who had fought for it. The crew of the Vanguard stood together, their hearts full of pride. They had done the impossible, the battle was over. The Vanguard had emerged victorious, and the invisible alien menace had been defeated. But the triumph came at a high cost. The crew had lost some of their best members along the way, and the scars of the battle were evident on everyone's face. Bonner's death was particularly hard to bear. He had been a trusted member of the crew, and his sacrifice in the face of danger had been one of the pivotal moments of their struggle. The survivors couldn't shake the heavy weight of his loss, and neither could they forget the other brave souls who had given everything for the mission's success. Captain Riley stood at the command deck, gazing out at the stars. The Vanguard was now on its way back to Earth, the battle having been won, but the victory felt hollow. In his heart, Riley knew that the price of their success was the loss of many good men and women. As he reflected on everything they had gone through, his thoughts turned to the fallen comrades. Bonner, Lieutenant Kai's emotional strength, and the sacrifices of the entire crew, they had all played a part in the mission's success, and it was impossible to ignore the emotional toll it had taken on each of them. The survivors moved silently through the corridors of the vanguard. The once vibrant ship now seemed quieter, the atmosphere tinged with sorrow. There were no celebrations, no triumphs. They had won the battle, but they had lost so much along the way. Even with the alien threat neutralized, the emptiness was palpable. The weight of the emotional scars, the grief from the friends they had lost, could not be easily shaken off. They had faced the ultimate enemy, but the fight had cost them more than they had ever imagined. The crew gathered for a somber memorial. A small service was held, honoring the fallen. Riley spoke softly, his voice full of emotion. "We lost friends, family, people we cared about," he said. "But we also won something incredible. We saved humanity. And we made sure that their sacrifices were not in vain." He paused for a moment, letting the words settle in. "The galaxy is a dangerous place, but we have shown that humanity will not back down, no matter the odds." The memorial service was brief, but it was meaningful. As the crew members stood together, they knew that the sacrifices made would not be forgotten. Their victory had come at a great personal cost, but the humans had proven something powerful. No matter how technologically advanced their enemies were, human perseverance, unity, and courage could overcome even the most impossible challenges. As the memorial ended, the Vanguard began its journey back to Earth. The mission was complete, but the work ahead was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and there would be more dangers, more challenges to face. But the humans aboard the Vanguard had learned something vital: they were stronger than they had ever known. They had survived against the odds, and that unity and strength would guide them through whatever the future held. The story closed with the survivors, knowing that their place in the galaxy had been secured. Humanity had proved that it would not be easily defeated. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. New challenges would arise, new dangers would emerge, but the humans' resolve was stronger than ever. They had faced an impossible enemy and emerged victorious, and they were ready to face whatever the future held, together. The final message was clear: even when facing impossible odds, even when the enemy seemed unbeatable, humanity's spirit could not be broken. The price of victory was steep, but the strength of their resolve and their unity made them capable of overcoming anything. As the Vanguard sailed through the stars on its way home, the humans knew that their fight was far from over, but they also knew that, no matter what came next, they would face it together, with unwavering courage and determination.